Yeah. Hello. Hi, everyone. Good morning. If you're able to take your seats, we're going to go ahead and start. Hopefully, there will be a few more people joining us today. I know the trains on the way to King's Cross, for me at least, were a little bit slow. So I think we'll have some more people walking in through the door, but we're going to go ahead and start this morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Elika. I'm the managing editor at Alliance Magazine. Thank you for coming out today during an orange heat warning. I've already spoken to a few of you who have traveled from a lot further who told me this isn't actually that hot, but it is very hot. Just making it worse this week. But we're very happy to have you here, both myself at Alliance and with GAGGA, the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, for a day dedicated to learning from climate funding models that work. So Noemi, my partner at GAGGA, we began talking about this event, I think about a year ago, and we wanted to create a space where we could convene professionals like you and sort of have a chance to learn from what's working and what doesn't work, and have sort of a knowledge exchange from people that are working in different places in the world. And we also realized that this was a big year for both of us. So GAGGA turns 10 this year and Alliance turns 30. And we wanted to know what we could learn from a cumulative 4 decades of experience. So I'm not going to answer that question right now because we have a whole day dedicated to looking at that. We're going to have some opening remarks from Dr. Matt Reed at the Aga Khan Foundation, and then Noemi is going to speak, and then we're going to be back on stage with the panel. And there are also, if you want to listen to today in Portuguese, just Portuguese or Portuguese and Spanish? Yes, we're going to have a Portuguese translator come up and say a few things, and then you can opt for a translation if you'd like.
Bom dia a todas e todos. Se alguém precisar dos aparelhos para interpretação, podem vir aqui no fundo buscar com a gente. Vamos ter a interpretação do inglês para o português. Então, por favor, se identifiquem para poderem acompanhar. Obrigada.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So yes, if you do want translations, these guys are back there with headsets. And with that, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Matt Reed, and then Noemi will come speak.
Great, thanks very much, and welcome to the Aga Khan Center. I guess I should say, in a way, welcome to London Climate Week. I mean, there are lots of events. Maybe some of you have already started your London Climate Week with events, breakfasts, or something like that. This is my first event of the week in a very, very busy week. So thank you very much for coming here and spending some time in our building. I just wanted to say a little bit about the Aga Khan Foundation and what is the Aga Khan Center. So the Aga Khan Foundation, we're part of a global network called the Aga Khan Development Network, 10 agencies working on economic, social, and cultural development. We essentially try to do 3 things. So improve the quality of life in all its dimensions, promote pluralism, so we work with everyone in the places where we're present, and to enhance self-reliance around the world. So just to give you an example, in the foundation, we work with about 60,000 community-led organizations every year, for example. We're present in a relatively small number of countries. So in Central and South Asia, Eastern Africa, a little in the Middle East, so Syria and Egypt, Portugal, and soon to be in Germany. Across all of that work, as I said, we're trying to improve the quality of life in all its dimensions. So given that, of course, we have to take into consideration climate change and its effects. We're not normally known as a quote, environmental organization. We're a development organization. I always say that we are experts in people and communities and livelihoods. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on, despite being a large organization led by somebody called His Highness, the Aga Khan, is that actually we're quite decentralized and community-led in that sense. So through those 60,000 community organizations we work with, through the various offices that we have on the ground in the countries where we're present, we actually generate our strategies from the ground up, essentially. And so one of the things that His Current Highness has been very, very, what should I say, has been passionate about for a very long time, having visited many of these communities over the years and listening to what the countries themselves are telling us, is that we needed to be much more deliberate and thoughtful about addressing climate change and the effects on the environment, and of course the effects on livelihoods. So we think it's really very, very appropriate that this group is meeting in our building. We're delighted to host you. I myself won't be able to be here during the day because we've got other events that are going to be happening in the building as the day goes on. We'll have a large group joining us late in the afternoon. We're doing a workshop with Conservation International to talk about some oceans work that we're beginning around coastal regeneration and how to address climate change and essentially environmental degradation on the coasts. And then we'll have a big group of about 120 people joining us for a reception and a mini film screening tonight. And then we're off because it's London Climate Week. So there you have it. So again, thank you very much for coming today. We're pleased to have you in the building, and I hope that I'll see you around. Take care.
Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you all here in this very well-conditioned room with nice temperature. Thanks so much, Elika, for the partnership with Alliance Magazine and this amazing event and the warm welcome. And thanks, Aga Khan Foundation, for hosting us and for giving space for a very important conversation today. To start, I'd like you to imagine something. So if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes for a moment. Imagine that you are in your home with your loved ones. Now imagine that tomorrow morning your community is flooded. The water is rising, roads are cut off, electricity is down, communication is patchy. Who are the first responders? Who know best how to react to this? What the community needs? When crisis hits, who do you trust to respond first? A consultant sitting in London? A fund manager in New York? A multilateral institution several thousand kilometers away? Or the local organizations, particularly the women-led community-based organizations, already embedded in the community? You can open your eyes if you want to. The people who respond first are women-led and community-led and based organizations already rooted in these places. The people who know the area intimately. They know which families are most vulnerable. They also know which crops survive drought and which water sources remain safe when there is contamination. Women are among those most affected by climate breakdown, and not because they are inherently vulnerable, but because political and economic systems have concentrated inequality, extraction, risk along lines of gender, race, geography, and income. Women and women-led community-based organizations are also the first responders in climate crisis, but they are also the long-term stewards of ecosystems and community resilience, the leaders in climate mitigation and adaptation. And yet, when it comes to climate finance, we continue to behave as though the people closest to the problem are the people least ready to lead the solution. That may be one of philanthropy's and any climate funder's most expensive contradictions. Because the climate crisis is not gender neutral, but climate finance remains remarkably gender blind. A recent Wings report found that 61% of foundations have increased their climate spending, which is great. But less than 0.1 of global philanthropic funding supports work at the intersection of gender and climate. In parallel, only 0.2% of climate-related official development assistance reaches women's rights organizations. Yet, gender trust, locally led solutions are not a nice-to-have addition to climate action. They are amongst the most effective responses we have. Evidence consistently shows that local interventions that center communities lead to stronger resilience, greater ownership, and more sustainable outcomes over time. And around the world, women-led community-based organizations are restoring ecosystems, are protecting biodiversity, are defending land and water, are strengthening food systems, supporting disaster response, and helping communities adapt to an increasingly uncertain future. And they are not waiting to be empowered. They are already leading. So if we know this, why does so little funding reach them? Part of the answer is that the challenge is not only the amount of climate finance available, it is the architecture through which it moves. Climate finance remains largely controlled by large institutions and bureaucratic systems that often struggle to reach local structures. And perhaps nowhere is this more visible than in philanthropy's understanding of scale. Many funders ask a very understandable question, and we're also asking this today. How do we achieve climate action at scale? But perhaps we have been asking that question in a wrong way, because we often assume that scale requires centralization. We assume bigger institutions produce bigger impact. We assume standardization produces effectiveness. But what if scale is not about replication? What if scale is about multiplication? What if scale comes from investing in the capacity of many communities to develop and lead solutions that work in their own contexts? What if the most effective path to climate action at scale is not choosing in between local leadership and large-scale impact, but to have both? By creating the conditions for thousands and millions of locally rooted solutions to flourish, to learn from one another, and influence systems beyond their communities. In that sense, scale becomes less about replication and more about connection, trust, and collective power. And that is exactly what alliances and ecosystem-based approaches can help make possible. This year is especially meaningful, as Alika already mentioned. It marks the 10th anniversary of the Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, also called GAGGA. 10 years of collaboration in between the lead organization, Fondo Centroamericano de Mujeres Foundation, the Central American Women's Fund, Mama Cash, and Bob Ends. 2 women's funds and 1 environmental justice organization came together in 2016 to bridge the urgent needs to close this gender climate finance gap. Over the last decades, GAGGA has been helping demonstrating what an ecosystem approach can look like in practice. By building upon an existing infrastructure, connecting women's funds, social environmental funds, environmental justice organizations, all with the objective to support women-led community-based organizations across regions and countries. Together with all its partners, GAGGA has shown how gender-just, locally led action can achieve both depth and reach. GAGGA has channeled more than 50 million to 2,500 women-led community-based organizations across the global south in 60 countries. GAGGA has supported more than 2,300 advocacy initiatives that contributed to 73 policy shifts within governments and investors. GAGGA has supported 170 women environmental human rights defenders to raise their voices and realities in global climate spaces. That all is advancing gender-just climate solution and gender and climate justice in general. That is climate action at scale. But there is another reality we must acknowledge. These organizations and movements are not operating under ideal conditions. Women, environmental, indigenous, and human rights defenders face increasing repression, shrinking to closing civic space, financial restrictions, criminalization, and security threats. Meanwhile, philanthropy often struggles to keep pace with these realities. Funding systems built around short project cycles, rigid categories, predefined outcomes, and conventional risk frameworks are often poorly equipped to support the work that communities actually need to do. And that brings us to another important point. Women-led community-based organizations do not only need resources, they need rights, protection, influence, access to decision-making spaces. If climate philanthropy wants to be effective, it cannot focus only on projects. It must also invest in the conditions that make long-term and systemic change possible. Within GAGGA, for example, grassroots organizations, women's funds, social environmental funds, environmental justice advocates, and legal organizations like AIDA, from whom you will hear more in the panel, all play very different but complementary roles within a broader alliance. Together, they create the enabling environment that allows local leadership to thrive. Because local advocacy agendas become a global collective voice. Real transformation happens when philanthropy supports that whole ecosystem, rather than viewing community action in isolation or following rigid country boundaries. And today, that ecosystem itself is under pressure. Many of the funds, networks, and movement support organizations, many also here in the room, have sustained community leadership for decades, are navigating growing uncertainty and significant funding constraints. That reality makes today's conversation especially urgent. This is not simply a question of replacing lost funding streams due to political contexts. It is a question of whether climate philanthropy can recognize, strengthen, and invest in the leadership, relationships, and infrastructure that already exist at scale. So what does effective climate philanthropy look like from the perspective of people on the front lines? How do we move more resources to those already leading solutions? And how do we build stronger pathways between climate philanthropy and the feminist and community-led infrastructure supporting groups at the local level? This is what we're gonna explore today. And we are very fortunate to have an exceptional panel with us today to help unpack these questions. And the conversation doesn't end here. After lunch, we'll continue with workshops and deeper discussions where we hope many of you will actually stay. Those sessions will be an opportunity to challenge assumptions, exchange experiences, think collectively about what it would take to unlock significantly greater resources for gender-just, locally led climate action. Because the challenge before us is not whether these solutions are needed, nor whether they exist. The challenge is whether we are prepared to invest in them at the scale this moment demands. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'll give back the floor now to Elika to moderate this panel with fascinating people.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay? Hello? Hello? I think I have to move it a little bit closer. Okay. Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you, everyone, for being here. These ones. Lovely. Well, welcome, everyone. Not to add another introduction to the morning, but today's panel is going to be taking a look at answering, I think, some of the questions that Naomi just put forward. If we know that locally led, gender-just climate solutions are among the most effective interventions available, why does so little climate and finance and philanthropy reach them? So I'm going to be putting this question to my panel. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Sonia Medina, the Chief Ecosystem Development Officer at CIF, Juliana Tinoco, the Executive Coordinator of Alianza Fondos del Sur and the Global South House, and Florencia Ortuzar at the Inter-American Association for Environmental Defense, or AIDA, which is a GAGGA partner. So I would like to start today with Juliana. Can you tell us a little bit about the work of Alianza Fondos del Sur and the Global South House and how you sort of see that fitting into the climate philanthropy ecosystem?
Hello. Can you all hear me?
No. Try holding the red, it's on the bottom of the microphone. Yes.
Oh, I see a red light.
Yes, I think that's working.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh,
Great.
good ones. Okay, good morning, everyone. Very, very pleased to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Noemi, for the words. I think you've pretty much summarized. Very little to be added, but also to thank GAGGA for being a partner, not only from us, but from many of our funds within the network. So, Alianza Fondos del Sur, we like the name in Spanish very much, but there's also an English translation. We're the social environmental funds of the Global South, a network of locally rooted social environmental funds operating across Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa. The main feature of the funds within our network is that they channel resources directly to communities in territories across the Global South. By communities, we mean indigenous people, local and grassroots organizations, social movements, gender-based organizations, youth-based organizations, environmental defenders, among others, working in the front lines of the climate, the biodiversity, and the social justice crisis of our times. Our network today comprises of 17 members. We have at least 2 of them here from the CASA, Social Environmental Fund and the Environmental Justice Fund. Those are funding mechanisms that have been created by activists and professionals working within the social environmental agenda in their own countries and territories. And they've been working grounded in the shared understanding that the most effective and the most legitimate solutions to environmental and climate changes emerge from the ground up, and that is the reason why channeling resources should also be from the ground up. And I will invite you all to learn more. We have people from my staff here also sharing a few of our materials. We are going to be 5 years this year, so there's also a celebration. And this has been like the initial kind of putting together a few of our key numbers that reflects the power and the strength of the network. But just to summarize quickly, into 2025 alone, our members, the sum of our members, they have channeled more than $19 million to communities in 70 countries across the Global South. And if we look at the entire history of our members within the network, we're talking about more than $117 million in more than 12,000 grants for Global South communities. So scale, right? So there is scale in that too. And briefly, the Global South House is our flagship collective platform. We've been working alongside other partners, other networks in the space to showcase that there is a solid Global South funding infrastructure already in place, supporting communities to give visibility to this infrastructure, to strengthen this infrastructure, and to build this collective moment within this wider discussion on finance and nature, climate and nature finance internationally. So thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, and congratulations on 5 years. Sonia, I want to turn to you next. If you can pass the microphone. SIFS has one of the largest philanthropic climate portfolios in the world. How do you think about impact, and how do you think about your work there?
Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here today, and talking about big birthdays. We will turn 25 next year, so watch the space on what that means. I don't know yet, but it's exciting. How we think about climate impact on our climate portfolio? You mentioned that it's one of the largest in the world. Probably we have about $1 billion worth of grants actively in our portfolio across more than 150 partners in 80 to 100 countries, so it's large. But we are not a climate funder. We are a children's funder. And that actually is how we think about anything that we do on climate. We invest in climate because it is one of the largest determinants of whether children today and in the future survive and thrive. We started, and we know later today we're hosting an event with UNICEF, really trying to bring very much the points that children today are suffering because of the climate crisis. We know that girls and boys, more than 1 billion children, are exposed to climate impacts. 98% of them breathe unsafe air every day. So this is truly a crisis that we need to be talking about. And it's not only climate impacts or unsafe air, which obviously determine their health and nutritional outcomes, educational outcomes, livelihoods, etc. So it is not separate. And ultimately, when we are designing our climate programming, we really look at it from the connecting of the dots, and it's the multiplier effect that we have. We have offices in Africa, in Addis, in Kenya, in Delhi, and in Beijing for climate work. And obviously, you may know the money comes from a London-based hedge fund manager that started with this premise on children. So how we talk about as a children's focused foundation that cares about climate because we believe are integral to ensuring that children survive and thrive. We're looking at it from both in a short-term perspective. We really need to ensure that we improve the lives of children today and now. So a lot of our more traditional children's work on our health and nutrition portfolio and our girls and women empowerment portfolio bring a climate lens to it. On the climate side, on the climate portfolio, the stuff that we do clearly is about water and clean air and climate and health and all of those things at the intersection of climate and gender, etc. But we also look long term. So, if you have heard of SIF in our portfolio, there is a very strong push as well for big mitigation. It's not enough to only be looking at the short-term impacts of today. Ultimately, we need to get to zero if we are going to save as many children as we can. So, long-term survival is synonymous to bringing the world to complete stop of the burning of the fossil fuels and a complete stop of emitting. And for that, system shifts are important, policy shifts, working with governments. So that has to be with, obviously, the public consent and societal goals that are obviously co-created with those in the front line. But I don't believe, and maybe we can discuss it because maybe not everybody agree in this room, that we cannot achieve ultimately all that we need to do with frontline funding alone. It has to also involve national level interventions, policy interventions, and solidarity in a multifaceted perspective. So I'm gonna leave it there. That's kind of our.
Thank you so much, Sonia. And I appreciated your clarification at the start that you are not a climate funder, you're a children's funder, but climate obviously is a huge issue for the children of our world. And I think we're going to be speaking a little bit about how climate should be a lens through which we view everything later today. But before that, I want to turn to Florencia. Can you tell us a little bit about your work at IDA and also your work as a partner of GAGGA and how that fits into the climate philanthropy space?
Sure. Thank you very much. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, GAGGA. Thank you, Alliance Magazine and Agatan for hosting us. It's great to see so much interest. Hello, panelists. Well, yes, I am the climate director at AIDA. AIDA is a regional organization that uses the law to protect the environment and the communities that depend on it. We're spread out in the whole continent of Latin America, and we see the continent as a whole. So we're not like in every country as the country, but looking at the region as a whole system. We work very closely with partners on the ground in each of the countries, but our vision is always regional and international. One very unique thing about AIDA, which I think explains some of the reflections that I will bring here, is that we work very close to the grassroots communities with them in the ground, but at the same time, we are also present in like the high level spheres of things where decisions are being made. So we actually do as a bridge to sort of take what is in the territories to the places where the decisions are being taken. And in this sense, for example, within our climate program, we follow up on climate finance and we follow up on some of the big multilateral funds, such as the Green Climate Fund, for example. So we have a pretty good view of why that kind of funding, which is sort of channeled mainly through massive financial mechanisms, has a lot of flaws and doesn't necessarily work, even though it does move a lot of money. And then we work also with GAGGA. We've been partners with GAGGA for a long time. And we sort of promote what GAGGA does because we believe that's a much more efficient way of placing money where the communities are by working with a network that already works, that makes sure not only that funds get to where they need to be, where the people of the territories are already doing locally solutions that are working, but also supporting them in doing it in the best possible way, because climate funds are very scarce, so we really need to make the most out of them. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I'm gonna put a question to you, and then I'm hoping maybe the two of you can also come in on this after Florencia, you speak. Many funders support local solutions in principle, but climate change is often framed as a problem requiring action at enormous scale. How should we think about scaling locally led solutions, but without losing what makes them effective? How do you see that sort of playing out in your space?
Okay, I think that the problem of the climate crisis definitely needs like big transformations. That's obviously the case, but that doesn't mean that the most efficient way to deal with it is by passing all the funds through big international financial institutions. So we see it very clearly with the GCF, for example. And I had like an epiphany, which I think like pretty puts this very well. When I was at COP29, I don't know if many of you are aware that that was the time when they decided on the new collective goal for finance. So they had to decide how much money the developed countries were going to commit to the developing countries that needed to deal with climate change. And it was a very like stressing moment and frustrating moment because the whole movement was there paying attention to those negotiations. And everybody knew that we weren't going to get what was fair. Everybody knew what was fair, but everybody knew we weren't going to get it. So there was like a very like frustrating sensation in the air, and everybody was there. But at the same time, I was moderating a GAGGA panel on locally led climate solutions. And this was a panel where we had 4 indigenous women from different regions of the world talking about what they were doing in their communities. And it was just amazing, like with very little money. They were solving agricultural issues, energy issues, food issues, and it was just working out perfectly. And I was like, whoa, that's happening over there. It's not getting nowhere, just frustration. And this is happening here. This makes so much sense. So that's the thing. Like, I really believe that the kind of finance that we need to scale up is the kind of finance that goes directly to these groups, always in alliance with the network, which is really complex and
well functioning. You have here like, many people that represent that network. And that is like a much better use of the funding that we have.
Sonia, I'm wondering if you have anything to say on this question.
I mean, it's absolutely the right question. And it's, at face value, you ask the question and then it seems like an obvious answer. But then you think about it a little bit more and it's obviously more complicated than what you would first think. Clearly, if people don't feel that they are benefiting from climate action, it's not going to sustain in time. If there is a loss of hope and agency, even if you have the most money in the world, it's not ultimately going to stick on the ground. So it's daily lives and community buy-in and agency and power clearly is a must. It's necessary, but is probably not sufficient to address the climate crisis at the scale and at the speed that we need. So I think local-led solutions are 100% needed. They are extremely valuable, and they are obviously addressing the right problem, because the diagnostic at the local level clearly is the best that you can have, because obviously you are the one experiencing, so the diagnosis will be correct. However, obviously the solution that is adapted to that diagnostic may well be very well suited, but that doesn't mean that there are other communities that you can learn from. And where is the learning and the peer-to-peer support and avoiding reinventing of the wheel going to happen? That also needs to be kind of brought into. So I think that the collaboration, not only horizontally but vertically, does bring value. For me, localization doesn't need to equate being isolated. The interconnection is obviously at the heart of ensuring that they are effective. And the solutions can happen at local level, could be at regional level, could be at provincial level, could be at national level, could be at the global level. You can continue to learn more from it. So changing policy environments clearly need public support. They need to be designed with those in mind, but ultimately our parliaments and national level states and institutions that ultimately will be adopting those policy changes. Unlocking finance at the scale, with very little money you can make a lot of change, but ultimately we need trillions of dollars to flow into the green transition. So where is that money going to come from? And clearly, I think institutional strengthening is something that can happen at many levels. So I'm not answering the question in terms of like, do we need more locally led solutions? Of course. Do we need to empower more people on the front lines? 100%. Is that going to be enough to achieve all of the scale that we need? Not sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient. And we need to think bigger than that.
Juliana, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I think what speaks to my heart when the conversation is around scale is that this also is the result of decades of delayed climate action. And now we need everything to deliver transformation at this extraordinary speed and magnitude that if we're looking at people in their territories, that's not real. That shouldn't be what's actually enforced to them. Not every local solution needs or wants or makes sense in terms of scale and diversity and the respect to social, cultural, and ecological dynamics is actually what's going to bring efficiency to those solutions and not the traditional understanding of scale. So tweaking a bit the world again, like looking into interconnectedness, which was already mentioned, the complementarity of action, understanding how this diversity is also an asset and not necessarily that standardization is what's desired in all in every kind of situation or ecosystem. And then I think just to complement, because I think this has been mentioned, Noemi mentioned also in her initial remarks, to kind of think scale in a different way. There is an importance of funding those those systems that provide the interconnectedness. How do we strengthen the ecosystems? How do we strengthen those actors that have been doing the work to connect the solutions at the local level, to foster the peer learning, to create more networks of trust and more networks of solidarity and common action. That's also an interesting approach. And the enabling environment, an interesting example that we've been talking about, scale, again mentioning Fundo Casa, they've recently started this work with the public bank in Brazil, Caixa, and they are now running this 3-year work, like it's open calls for summing more than $10 million to support more than 400 social organizations working across the social biodiversity economy in Brazil. And that translates into scale in itself, the numbers, but what will ultimately also result is this enabling environment for this kind of social biodiversity economy to thrive. And that has a multiplier effect even beyond those 3 years and beyond the impressive numbers. And that's the kind of result that a local fund, a local partner can do, not only in terms of making the money flow to more, but also how that creates the right enabling environment for the interconnectedness. This is a terrible word for me. But yeah, as mentioned, how do we connect more of those local solutions and understand that as scale as well?
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. As you were speaking, I was thinking a little bit about, I recently have been doing some other interviews with climate philanthropy figures for my work at Alliance. And someone I spoke to said we're in the age of adaptation because we have failed mitigation in many places. So that has moved us here. So something to think about. Sonia, I want to come back to you and put a question to you. What role do you think philanthropy can play beyond just funding? What do you think about at SIF in terms of how to support the ecosystem beyond just money?
Yeah, music to my ears, that question, because I really don't think that philanthropy is just money, right? So, and if that is how we play, then we are failing our objectives. Ultimately, half of the resources of any foundation in the world is taxpayers' money. So it's public money. So if ultimately all you're doing is recycling the money, you shouldn't have taken it in the first place. So I think that it's incumbent upon all philanthropists to take that very seriously. Second, we don't, the other principle that guide us, and I think all philanthropy, is that it is not our goals. We may have the mission of the foundation in the case of SIF is ensuring that all children are safe, healthy, and have opportunity in life, regardless of your background and environment. So it's quite a wide, high-level mission. And I think that's right. It has to sit ultimately at that kind of level, and ultimately philanthropy is there to provide the scaffolding or resources, connections, perspectives that society is deciding they want. So ultimately, it's about delivering societal goals, delivering national level priorities and community level priorities. So that is part of it. So what does that mean? As a philanthropy, what is the value that we bring that is of our capital that is different to that of government money or private sector money or owns communities' resources? We can potentially operate with a longer term scale. We have perhaps less, we are less bound for a particular agenda. A country will have their electorate dictating, what is it that they are, or they could have shorter term cycles. But they have the legitimacy of electorate, and we don't. So, there are pros and cons on all of that. The flexibility of a long-term perspective, we could potentially be operating at a more global scale, so across countries. In the case of SIF, that is the case. So what does that mean? In addition to resources, financial resources, which are determined by the objective of the society and the communities and the children that we are serving, our ultimate beneficiaries. We could be connectors. We do a lot of enabling by bringing different perspectives, and, from convening to creating collaboration platforms, building infrastructure, building institutions on the long run. So as a Chief Ecosystem Development Officer across all of the foundation, one of the things is about, okay, how do you create institutions that are where the power and the agency sits with that institution is not program funding. The large majority of our funding is core funding, multi-year support that is localized, and we build infrastructure that is rooted where it needs to be. But then it is connected. So we have a network of re-granters in the climate space that are both regionally as well as sectorally based. Sometimes that interconnection of infrastructure needs connective tissue, from, as I said, collaborative platforms, but also shared data or access to organizations. So being an honest broker, being funding long term, building institutions that last, and providing perspective, I think they are all within the power of philanthropy that is well done to operate. And I think it goes far beyond financial resourcing alone.
Absolutely, thank you. Florencia, I want to come to you next. From your perspective, what do you find useful from philanthropy beyond just funding?
I think it's interesting that philanthropy lives in the same system where corporations that we're trying to deal with live. So they speak the language, they understand a language that many times communities don't even know about, don't even care. They don't want to be part of that, but they are being stepped over by that. So philanthropy, I think, has a very important role in vouching for these communities because they live in the system, but they understand what needs to be understood, that communities have a very important say in what's going on and in the solutions. So they can vouch for the communities, they can open up space for them, they can push back on harmful funding that is going on. And in the end, all this amounts to also a very important feeling of not being alone. So it's like a bit of sanity in a world that sometimes seems like way out of track. So I think that's a very part of philanthropy as well.
Thank you. That's a good point. Juliana, do you have anything that you want to respond on this one?
Well, I think most of it have been said. Like I think Sonia was making this extensive and impressive list of what we also believe philanthropy should play a role, the connector, the work in supporting the advocacy agendas, the producing knowledge, like the partnership that goes way beyond just the financial resources. That is, again, a lot of the role that the proximity funds do in strengthening capacities and being the trustworthy partner on the ground, and that translates into like working with environmental defenders, for example. How do you actually achieve to do proper work for persons that are under threat if you're not the right partner at the right place in the right moment, speaking the language, knowing the contextual challenges, etc. So those are also roles that philanthropic actors have been playing in the field. But not to repeat the same points, I would add two kind of reflections. Philanthropy, it's a very broad sector, and there's multiple philanthropies. People would see and recognize each other in different kind of spectrums of that. So I think this sector should also do this work of better recognizing peers where they are. So this is something we've been working with Alianza, with the Global South House, give visibility to the solid infrastructure that exists, of funding mechanisms. They're local, they're proximity funds, social environmental funds, indigenous funds, territorial funds, women-led funds, activist funds, thematic funds. Those are all actors on the ground that have been channeling resources from the Global South, but that lacked visibility in many of the spaces where those conversations are being held, where philanthropy is making their own decisions. So this is one thing. And the last point would be on risk. I've been reflecting a lot how to better talk about risk, because I've also been hearing that philanthropy should take more risk. That's the sector that could potentially take risks, and I've been challenging people to think like, what's actually risk, right? Not to think of risk as risk for capital or risk for institutions, but the risk of not acting. And I think philanthropy should be the leaders to say the actual risk is for us not to do this work.
Absolutely. I think risk is a really important thing to be talking about, and I think also willingness to try things that fail is a big part of risk as well. And that's a conversation we're always trying to have with Philanthropy at Alliance. I want to open it up to audience questions. So my colleague is going to come pass the mic around. And I also wanted to say, I should have mentioned this at the outset, but we are live streaming this. So if any of our live stream attendees also have questions, we will we'll try to get to you. So put them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them. But yeah, if anybody has a question, it's the on the bottom. Anyways, but if someone has a question, my colleague Jody will come. Yes. Yeah, can you in the front row?
Not so much a question, just a complimentation. So I'm Amália Souza from Casa Fund in Brazil, and just a few little comments about some of this conversation. I think that the reason that we came together as the Alliance, as the Comoa Network, as the Global South House, which now have 41 funds across more than 50 countries, or 70, funding all over. The reason we came together as funds is because we were actors in our space for a long time. Took me 20 years to found Casa with the other activists because there was no money going to the ground. The only reason all of us had our funds because we looked at philanthropy and it wasn't going to do what had to be done in our society to solve our problems. I think that the biggest mistake that I've been seeing in philanthropy for decades, mostly the conservation area, the climate, is the belief that locals don't have capacity, that somebody has to devise strategies that come to our countries and solve our problems. So social justice, whatever, environment, adaptation. It's all about concentration of large NGOs coming in. Whereas we have all the solutions. We have all the infrastructure, not just the funds, but the important and very experienced NGOs. We have all sorts of systems inside each country that can handle all the challenges we have. What we don't get is the money that is getting trapped in the hands of the northern-based organizations that claim that they are better at solving our problems than we are. I think this is the vision that we're trying to transform here, that we're not seen as capable enough of handling a large amounts of money. But then when you have, a Brazilian bank with all the complexity putting in one shot $10 million and, we handle it faster than anybody else. And then other private banks come and they do the same because they know that we can. There is capacity. I think the misunderstanding is that we can't. But I think this is what needs to be changing because the delivery, the landing of resources inside the countries that hold the most important climate regulating and biodiversity rich biomes on this planet are not getting 10% of the funding. And society can change everything. So it is a lot more about putting money directly in the solutions that exist but can't be executed because there is no support. In the scale that we are trying to do, which is not half a dozen projects, huge projects that do something, it is the collective. It's actually all the layers need to work together. The large international, the large national, the middle-sized regional and national, but massively the local communities who are the most impacted and who have the least amount of resources. Just to finish, like in our demand at Casa Fund, we are growing every year. This year we're going to fund over 800 grants. Just this year, we're reaching almost 6,000 at the end of this year, so half of that number, because we are designed for that. We need to get society fed. It's like oxygenating the roots of society. It's about building the fabric of democracy together. Everybody has to participate. That's what we're trying to do. And this is a huge revolution in how things have been done all along. And this is what we're hoping in places like this that gets understood. So a design like GAGGA that actually didn't reinvent the wheel, they got millions, we've been there for 10 years, millions in the north that they actually fed into the systems that already existed, which is not how it's done usually, right? Some big organization gets the money and then they hire all the staff and they set up all the offices and they execute themselves. This is what we're hoping stops happening and more structures like this are fed because this really works.
Thank you. I like the analogy of oxygenating the roots. Maybe we can take a question and then we'll respond to the comment and the question. Yeah?
Hi, I'm Juliana Strobel from Avina Foundation, and I have a question to you, Florencia, from AIDA. Since AIDA is being observing the Green Climate Fund, Avina is accredited to the Green Climate Fund, and we are implementing with great effort these resources and trying to make the funds get to the local level and to the local people where we work with. But the question here is, how do we make this big money flow to the funds at local level? Because nowadays it's too hard because the Green Climate Fund is structured as any other big climate finance structures. It is structured to make the money flow through financial institutions, not funds, and it has demands for the ones who are implementing these funds. They have very hard to reach demands. So how could we maybe together put an effort together to make advocacy so that this kind of fund, this big fund, has very specific and demands that make it possible for the funds to reach local level. Now the Green Climate Fund has these local climate action guidelines, but when you need to implement it, it's still very hard. So maybe to have some reflections about that, Florencia. Thanks.
Would you like to respond to that?
Oh, it's so nice to see you. That's a very complicated question. It's something that we've been grappling with for a long time. And actually, when Avina got accredited, it was like the best news, but I know it was quite traumatic, to say the least. Yeah, and I see, like, the Green Climate Fund, I actually see, like, it tries to do it, but it just doesn't achieve it. It's really frustrating because they have this principle of country ownership where they recognize that it's really important that every project is grounded in the territories, but they just can't live to it. It's amazing. They, like, 80% of its money or more is channeled through, I think it's 4 accredited entities, which are the World Bank, the IDB, the European Bank, etc. So in practice, they absolutely don't do it, but in policies and in words, they do. So there's really, like, a lot of work we need to do. Like, for example, the last thing they did was that they opened up a facility to fund, like, local projects where you don't even need to be an accredited entity. So any organization could go and ask for funding for a specific project. And I was like, yeah, that's it. But now what's happened is that when you speak to observers of the GCF, they tell you, no, in the end, like, private companies are making use of it, just funding projects without enough safeguards. So it's even worse than before. So I mean, yeah, we have to keep working for the GCF to be more in way with its own policies. But I guess at the same time, we need to work through what really is standing now and is working, which is all this amazing network of funds and organizations that are actually achieving taking the funds to the local communities and being with them so that the funding is implemented responsibly. So yeah, let's keep working, let's talk about this, but also let's try and strengthen what we already have and is working.
Sonia or Juliana, do you want to respond to that or to Amalia's comments?
So I like to say that I have just a couple of perhaps data points. The climate philanthropy, big climate philanthropy, tends to be very American in nature. Okay, the large majority of big philanthropy comes from big philanthropy in general comes from the U.S. In climate, which are the numbers that I know more about 80% of the flows are U.S.-based foundations, and about 50% actually stays in the U.S. And the rest goes outside. So we're already talking about that kind of perspective on what philanthropy is therefore and where it comes. One of the things that over the last 13 years at the foundation, one of the things that I have been advocating for very strongly, and I've been trying to drive more and more, is that not only we have philanthropy from other parts of the world, because we really need to be cultivating donors from all over the world, philanthropies from that have the lived experience and they have the understanding of what the communities that they serve. Indian philanthropy, Asian philanthropy, Latin American philanthropy, African philanthropy will be more likely serving those communities more than the American philanthropy that's going there. I think that's clear. So cultivating those new donors is something that I think is in everybody's interest, because we will then see potentially, hopefully, a lot more of that flow there. But it's work in progress, and it takes a long time to cultivate these domestic donors, but they exist. Of course, they exist. There's philanthropy everywhere. So that's one point. Second, to your point about people underestimate local capacity to absorb big resources and to implement, I couldn't agree more with you, 100%. We build building. One of the other things is that how do you not only nurture domestic donors, for that to have a higher likelihood of sticking them in the country is to have domestic infrastructure, right? And one of the things is that over and over again, philanthropy underestimates the absorption capacity at the local level. When we have built local intermediaries on specifically on climate or sectoral or wherever, people will think, a lot of my peer donors will say, oh, it's gonna take us this long to get that kind of level of spend. And over again, you can achieve those goals extremely quickly, because absolutely, of course, there is absorption capacity at the local level. And then, of course, there is capacity to. And so I agree 100% with that. The question is that there are solutions that communities absolutely have, and they should be empowered and funded to implement. And there are solutions that are not within their gift to have access to, unless there is a more... for example, if we are talking about climate hardcore mitigation, adoption of electric vehicles, if it's expensive, and if communities cannot afford them, they cannot afford them. If solar is expensive, it is expensive, and they cannot afford it. Communities may not necessarily be able to invest the billions of dollars that it takes to upgrade your grids, or to invent the how you're going to be decarbonizing cement, or how you're going to be dealing with trade issues. So in the climate sphere, there are solutions that need to be implemented at all levels. So I think the solutions that we're talking about here are the ones that communities know very well what they're talking about. They have the capacity to do and should absolutely be. But that won't be the 100% of the solution to the climate crisis. I think we all agree with that as well. And for that, you need to open up the aperture of solutions by reducing the cost of many of these technologies with access by policy and financing at the scale.
Thank you. Juliana?
Yeah, just briefly to complement, I think coming back to your point, Juliana, on the where big money sits, right, and how to unlock that, and even how to avoid competition within the local level, because there's so many different actors that should be gaining access to those extremely complicated and bureaucratic and frankly designed not to be achievable funds. I think one of the reasons why we are coming together as the Global South House and creating this collective tissue of different funding mechanisms that already exist is also that we get a bit more political about that, right? It's not only the technicalities that we need to be obviously, there needs to be people sitting down and saying, like, what is it that needs to be done in the technical level? But ultimately, I do question if there's so many technical problems, or if this again is perception of risk, who they trust and who they don't trust. We talk a lot about trust-based philanthropy. I believe all philanthropy is trust-based. It's just a matter of like who are they trusting, right? It's more political than it is technical in the end, because solutions are out there, innovations are out there. You have great people that can use technology to fill in the gaps. You know, solutions. There's not a lack of technical solutions to surpass bureaucracy and complications of process, and there's definitely not a lack of actors on the ground who are ready to implement. But what we need, I think, it's to go more together when we go political about it, and I think this is what we are hoping and intending to do also with our networks and our movements.
Absolutely. Let's take another question. Yes, you had it up a few times.
Hi, I'm Laura. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Laura from Humanity. I'm from Brazil as well, so it's nice to see fellow Brazilians in the room. I have a question about risk. I have recently been to Skull Forum, and the conversations there can be very different coming from an investor side. So I have a question to the different panelists. One of the things that people were discussing there is the fact that philanthropy should de-risk investments for other investors. So I'd love to hear your opinion about that. If the role of philanthropy is de-risking for other investors in the ecosystem.
Sonia, do you want to start with that one?
Yes and no. Depends on when people talk about de-risking. I think sometimes the obvious model that people have in their head is that there is a big fund to be put in place, and there is pools of capital, and philanthropy should be at the bottom with grants, and then or patient capital, and ultimately you stack up this ladder. So the leverage is there, and potentially that first loss tranche in the fund allows the fund to exist in the first place. And I think that is a well understood model. There should be more of those, and that is really helpful. But there is not enough philanthropy in the world to de-risk every single pool of capital out there. So if philanthropy only did that, I think we will be losing leverage in much bigger scale. For example, philanthropy is that because those pools of capital, there are other ways of potentially leveraging this big source of money. Is it philanthropy, or is it government resources, or is it other type of private investors that have that kind of model, or is it? I think we need to be thinking creatively what that is. What philanthropy can do that others can't is, for example, really good technical assistance to governments on policy design, which can, help governments achieve far better efficiency on their fiscal measures, on how they are negotiating with the investors in the country. Like, for example, the Bridgetown initiative that philanthropy has been at the heart of advising and supporting the Barbados government and those countries. There has been negotiations of debt clauses from private investors and other investors into the country that should an extreme heat event happen, that those countries won't be required to service that debt. that is billions of dollars of money that those countries will need to be served. So the trade-off is that is the money from philanthropy better served in designing and supporting more of rich families, and that's just an example, or more and more of these pool funds where we're just there at the first loss level. And there are many, many examples like that. So it depends. There are some times when that is absolutely the right way to do. And I think as you were saying earlier, there are many types of philanthropies. There are philanthropies that feel that is the model and they understand it very well and they can do that all day long and that is their contribution. And there are other philanthropies that, so I think the diversity of approaches I think is also really valuable.
Anything to add?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that many financial mechanisms are maybe better suited to the risk so that even private finance comes in. But I think that there's one interesting thing that philanthropy can do about risk much better than others, and is because there's more connected to communities, they understand better their needs and their world. They are in a better position to take into consideration the risk of communities and not only think about the risks to the funders, but what about the risks to communities? What happens when communities don't have reliable long-term funding? So they can start considering that, and that can set the path so that other financial mechanisms also begin considering that, and that would be a really good change for how money flows in general.
I love being the last because then I don't have to be technical. I can just be provocative. But I think just, again, tweaking the word risk, right? I think looking into, again, the type of philanthropic actors that we've been working at, they are already de-risking a lot for investors, for others, but also de-risking for the communities and supporting the communities who are ultimately de-risking it for us, right? When an indigenous community protects forests, avoids deforestation, which is ultimately a risk to the economy, to the financial sector, to the climate, to people, right? So how do we understand risk? Like, we're looking into existential risk here. And I think what our funds are doing, what communities are doing, is the true de-risking. The problem is that risk is understood as risk of capital, right? And what we've been observing as well in terms of the climate and the conservation agendas is, well, for many years we have said we want to engage the private sector, the financial sector. And I said to someone yesterday, look, we should disengage them a bit now, because now it all became a market opportunity. That's not what it's all about, right? We should be looking this into a much more serious lens than how am I going to de-risk my capital to invest in climate action, to invest in conservation action, because otherwise the numbers will never quite fit. And once they fit, they will change the narrative, they will change the risk perception. We'll be always trying to chase something that's never going to quite fit the capital conversation. So yes, I think technically speaking, there's a lot of de-risking opportunities. We've been speaking about how to open doors with private investors, with banks. Casa has been doing it, other members of ours have been doing it. So once we open those doors, open those conversations, we need to be speaking that language. So we are going to tell, we are de-risking your investment. Yes, not everyone's gonna hear me say that, but eventually we're gonna have to make those collaborations more possible. And it is actually true, but ultimately we need to be seeing risk from a different lens, as we need to be seeing scale from a different lens as well.
Absolutely. Let's take one more audience question. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the conversation. My name is Lindsay. I'm based here in London. I'm with Acumen. We're an impact investor. So my question to the panel is, we've heard a lot about the challenges today, and I'm sure we will continue to hear that throughout the week about the challenges. Just quick thoughts from each of you. What is one thing you are excited about that you're seeing that's really giving you hope that we will solve, that will be high impact, and that we can potentially do together?
Francis, shall we start with you?
Well,
Well, one thing that gives me a lot of hope is that every time in AIDA, in my organization, that we have done any project that has to do with bringing together the locally led climate solutions, we've gotten so much more responses than we expect. We haven't even given out a call like to the whole wide world. We just do it like to our allies because we don't want to get it out of hand. And there's always so much more than what we thought there was. So these locally led climate solutions are happening and they are effective, and there is a whole network of organizations, quite complex also, that is supporting them. So that is something that gives me a lot of hope, and panels like this, conversations like this, when I see people are interested in this and believe in this, and there's so much talent put into this, gives me hope.
Sonia, what do you think?
Well, I think I'm pretty optimistic actually on the progress that we have made. I know that obviously the climate crisis is extremely overwhelming and is very real, and with obviously a heat wave just happening outside, doesn't feel like in this room, but or Super El Nino charging, ahead this year. It is obviously very sobering how much is left to do, which obviously will be decades, if not centuries, of work ahead of us. But you go back into just a short 10, 20 years ago, we were talking about scenarios on the IPCC of 4-6 degrees of warming, and those have been completely taken away from the models because they are not plausible anymore. We have made so much progress. Now, of course, heading towards 2.6, between 1.8 and 2.6, is that good enough? Of course not. We still have a lot to do, but we have bent the curve and we continue to do it every single day. I mean, renewable energy has surpassed for the first time 30% of global generation globally. The International Court of Justice ruled in an incredible opinion this year or last year that nations have an obligation to future generations with regards to the climate crisis. Reform voters in this country, 70% of them believe that the climate crisis is real and should be acted. They just don't vote accordingly. But that's a different point. It's a salient issue. It's not that obviously climate denial in other parts of the world is a different matter. But in general, in Asia, in Africa, you see solar taking off like in dramatic ways, and so is wind. And I think there are more and more people that absolutely see that the transition to a green economy is inevitable. And what they worry about right now, why we are talking in London Climate Action Week about implementation and not longer ambition. We are not talking no longer about raising ambition. We are talking about how we are going to do it. What is the action that needs to be done? Becomes, I think, the acceleration of adoption of action around the world is only going to accelerate. But of course, we're playing catch up because the severity of the extreme weather events and climate crisis is very real. So mitigation alone is not sufficient. We need to adapt accordingly, and we cannot afford leaving people behind. So all in all, I'm a pragmatic optimist in the sense that I'm hopeful. I think we are in the right direction. I wish we had got our act together 20 years ago rather than just now. Of course, the public are scared in many respects, and so I am too, as a mother of 3 boys. So it is, but plow ahead, keep your head up, keep plowing ahead, and I guess we're all activists in this room, so we keep going.
Nice. Well, I guess I'm excited about the work that we're doing. Luckily, I'm excited about my own work, but in the sense that I've been in the climate and conservation agenda for more than 20 years, and I think it has never been such a fruitful time to discuss and to put on the table the actual conversation around the money flows, the power relations embedded in the money conversation, philanthropy taking part in the climate conversation more actively, us challenging the structures that already are in place, talking about the system failures that exist in the broader financial sector that are not enabling change to happen. So those very nuanced and sophisticated conversation, it feels like they're gaining momentum. I'm really excited to be able to support, give visibility to so many interesting solutions that are out there, to give visibility to what's happening at the local level, which I truly, honestly believe has a huge part to play in this conversation. So there's, I think we've advanced to an interesting moment in which also the conversation around climate, around nature, it has embedded the social aspects, the economic aspects in a much more interesting and mature way. And I think now we should definitely kind of hold to that conversation. Don't let this kind of lose momentum, because if we lose sight of those aspects, we might, like the risk is that we're going to have transitions, multiple transitions, they're going to leave people behind, they're going to sacrifice a lot of important parts of our planet in order to justify a vision of climate transition that will ultimately only generate market opportunities and for a few, increasing inequalities. I don't think we all want this in terms of our climate transition. So I'm excited to be part in this conversation, hoping that we can all build this together with everyone that's in this room, everyone that connected in the live stream, that's probably interested people. So yeah, I think that's what excites me.
Thank you. And thank you for such an excellent final question to wrap everything up. That is all the time that we have for our panel today, and I want to say thank you to all three of you for such an excellent conversation. And thank you to everyone who joined us in this room. Just a few housekeeping things. So we're going to break now. We have some refreshments and some drinks outside. It's a little bit early for lunch, but there'll be food and we'll have a break. And then we will be back in here at 12:30. We're going to be doing a workshop, so we're going to have tables in here. So take your backpacks with you or put them in the corner where the coats are, because we're going to rearrange the room slightly while we're out of here. And when we come back, Noemi will take you through what we're planning to do with our workshop. But thank you, everyone, and thanks to our wonderful panel.